So we're going to be talking about statistical questions today, and so we're going to go over the note section for statistical questions, or the lesson for statistical questions, that you can also find in iExcel by clicking at the bottom of the skill that you are practicing. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to read this. So this is statistical questions. A statistical question requires the collection of data to answer it. The data is expected to vary. So if you're asked a statistical question, you would expect more than one answer. So before we continue reading, let's go ahead and define what data is. Data is just a fancy word for information. So information is just a fancy word for data. And vary is like variable. It changes. So vary just means it can change. Doesn't mean it's always going to be different, but it has the ability to be different. And let's see if there's any other questions in here words in here that are new to us, and it doesn't look like there are. So we're going to continue to read. For example, compare the two questions below. So one of these questions is a statistical question and the other one is not. How tall is the tallest mountain in Colorado? How tall are the mountains in Colorado? So the one above right here is going to be not the statistical question. The first question has only one answer. Mount Elbert is 14,400 feet. There is no variation in the answer. So this is not a statistical question. So as soon as you said, how tall is the tallest mountain, you're referring to just one mountain, and that would be the tallest mountain, which is Mount Elbert, and that does not change in its size. Once it got that size, it stayed that size, and it will not change unless something drastic happens to it. The second question, however, can be answered by collecting data on the heights of mountains in Colorado. Remember, data, that's just information, so it's just info that we're collecting. The data will vary since different mountains have different heights. So if this big circle was Colorado and we had the tallest mountain, but we also had these other mountains here, the statistical question asking how tall are the mountains in Colorado would be measuring the height of all of the mountains. So each time it went to find information or data on a mountain, the data or the information that they're finding will change based on the height of the different mountain. So, for example, the data will include 14,114 feet for Pikes Peak, 14,259 feet for Long's Peak, and so on. So this is what makes it a statistical question. So now let's try it. Decide if the following question is a statistical question. How tall are you? Now think about it. Pause the video if you need to just stop and think about it for a little bit, but you are one person, okay? You are not many people, so your height, although it changes as you age, it will not change in the day that you have asked the question. So if the info cannot change, it makes it a non-statistical question. This question would be answered by a single response. So this is not a statistical question. Let's try another example. Decide if the following question is a statistical question. How many inches of snow does New York City get in a typical year? So if New York City had a full year map starting here and starting there, and they had January all the way to December, and then we marked 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all the months in between, and then we assigned a value for rainfall. So we said snowfall, 2 inches in January, maybe it was 4 inches in February, but then we know maybe even 1 inch in March. But then out of March, you're not going to have any snow, so it's going to be 0, 0, 0, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and so on. So that's going to be a statistical question because the answers will vary. Now, you can click this because this is our skill. So you could click that from the notes, or you can just click the link from our schedule. So now we're going to go ahead and get up a problem to work on. So now let's take a look at these practice problems. So we'll take a look at this one here, and let's go ahead and read it. Is the following a statistical question? Remember, statistical questions, the info collected will vary. Vary means it will or can change depending upon the subject. So, in what year did Thomas Jefferson become president of the United States? Is that question statistical? So let's think. Were there different Thomas Jeffersons? And the answer is no, there were no other Thomas Jeffersons. There was one Thomas Jefferson who became president, and so he became president on a certain day, and that day will not change. It doesn't matter how many times you ask the question, when did Thomas Jefferson become president of the United States? We're referring to one person, and therefore that information won't change. So this question is not statistical. This is not a statistical question. Not statistical. Only one answer. All right. Is the following a statistical question? How many states are in the United States? Well, we know that answer. It's 50, and that's not going to change if you ask me another time. It's still going to be 50. So no, not statistical. There is only one answer. Let's try one more here, and I'm going to move to the app real quick. And so we got, is the following a statistical? And we said, no, it is not. So terrific. That's great for us. Let's go on to the next one here. Is the following a statistical question? How tall are palm trees? Yeah, I'm going to say, how tall are palm trees? Palm trees, more than one tree, is going to be varied depending on if you have a palm tree that is this size, a palm tree that is that size. I know when I was living in Hawaii, we had palm trees that were all the way, and actually even in Salinas, we got palm trees that are all sorts of sizes, and some of them are really tall. So the following will have this pen tool is horrible on this. This will have different answers depending on what palm you measure. So this is a statistical question. Let's try a couple others here. Is the following a statistical question? At what temperature in degrees Celsius does water boil at sea level? This is very, very specific. Not only is it asking what temperature in degrees Celsius, so it's very specific as to what you're measuring it in, does water, okay, and water will change its boiling point at different levels of elevation. At sea level, though, is what they specify. So no, this answer will not change. It is always going to be the same. Now, it will change if you're higher in elevation in the mountains, but if you are at sea level, this is the same answer. So no, not statistical. And then let's do one more. Is the following a statistical question? How often is a typical student at your school absent? A typical student is not a specific student. It's a typical student. And so we're going to get different answers depending on what student we ask. In fact, if we ask one person in our class and then another person in our class, we'll get two different answers. So that is going to be a statistical question. All right, I think that's enough examples. If you get stuck, you get two wrong in a row, come back and see Mr. K if he's available. If not, go ahead and work on your lowest recommended.